Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ashram Talks. My name is Ambika, and I'm one of the hosts here. Today, we're joined by international author, speaker, and teacher of yoga philosophy, Simon Haas. Simon has taught in 14 countries, including at the United Nations, and is currently completing his doctoral studies in the Bhakti tradition at the University of Oxford. So thank you so much for joining us again this evening, Simon. Your last class was very inspiring, and I'm sure folks are eager to continue their journey through the Bhagavad Gita with you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Ambika. I'm very excited to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we'll be doing chapter 1, verses 12 and 13 today.
So, in this particular session, we'll have the opportunity to meet one of the central protagonists of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhishma, the battlefield elder. But we'll also be looking at exploring the theme of accepting the circumstances that life puts us in. Before beginning, let's start off with a brief Mangalacharana, an auspicious invocation. This is an invocation or prayer to the teachers in our life. He Shri Guru Jnanadadina Bandho Swananda Datta Karunaika Sindho Brindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasiddha Radha Pranaya Prachara. So in every session, what I would like to do is before going to the specific passages that we'll be addressing, to begin with maybe 10 minutes on the key features of the Bhagavad Gita as a yoga text, or the specific chapter, key features of the specific chapter that we're looking at. So we are today still in chapter 1, which is a chapter about facing crisis, what is known in Sanskrit as Vishada. Literally means despair. So the kind of crisis that plunges us in utter darkness, that, tears our small human story apart and leaves us just like Arjuna in utter despair. And it's a kind of crisis through which there doesn't seem to be any way out. And we feel entirely helpless. So the Mahabharata doesn't have chapter titles, but over the centuries, the 18 different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita has come to have a title that is accepted by all traditions. And the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita has two titles. Sometimes it's Sainya Darshanam, which means observing the armies. And sometimes it's Vishad Yoga or Arjuna Vishada Yoga. So in other words, the yoga of crisis, the yoga of despair. And you can find those chapter titles in manuscripts. Many manuscripts of the Gita, if you go to the colophon at the end of each chapter, it'll mention the title of the chapter. So this chapter is telling Arjuna's story, his very public existential crisis. Now, importantly, we each will go through at least one such an experience in our life, maybe several. And we're not speaking here about like a bad day at work or some challenge that's occupying, that we're struggling with and that's occupying our attention. This is what I will call a dark night of the soul, in which we lose our sense of purpose and we find ourselves unmoored and burdened with a lot of suffering. Suffering related to time, fear, lamentation, and confusion, and entirely helpless, just like Arjuna found himself at Kurukshetra between the two armies. So, each crisis that you or I may experience will be different. So it's as unique to us as our own fingerprint. There will be different triggers, for example, and we'll look in a few verses from now, we'll be able to see what the trigger of Arjuna's dark night of the soul is. Look out for that. But every existential crisis or dark night of the soul, it has four shared features, so four symptoms. Now, this is very interesting because if we know the symptoms of a dark night of the soul, we'll be able to recognize if we've been through one in the past. Or we might recognize that we're actually going through one at the moment. Alternatively, we might be able to see those symptoms approaching and know that a dark night is on the horizon for us. So I'm in Costa Rica at the moment. I don't know if you're able to hear it. Hopefully not. But I'm in the middle of a huge thunderstorm. So there's some background sound, like it's actually practically shaking the walls. Hopefully it's not being caught by this mic. But I say that because when a storm approaches, then there are some symptoms. So here in Costa Rica, when there's a thunderstorm, a huge thunderstorm, everything goes quiet. Normally, you always hear the birds, but suddenly you can't hear a single bird in the sky. And then the darkness envelops the sky. Dark blackish clouds covering the sky in all directions, even if it's like the middle of the afternoon. And then suddenly you hear thunder breaking through and shaking the buildings. So then you know there's a storm that's just about to enter our field of perception. In the same way, when you know the symptoms of a dark night of the soul, you know, okay, now there is a storm in my life, a crisis, a dark night of the soul that's on the horizon. So when I was younger studying the Gita, I would go straight to chapter 2, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava, where Arjuna says, Krishna, I'm confused about what I should do. Please accept me as your teacher. And then Krishna begins teaching the different systems of yoga. And I thought that the first chapter was kind of merely just setting the scene. But there are no wasted verses in the Gita. And chapter 1 is actually packed with teachings. Now, in the next, in a session in a few days' time on June the 9th, we will look at the features, we'll look at the trigger of Arjuna's dark night of the soul. We will also look in detail at the four symptoms of a dark night of the soul. So please don't miss that session, because it's a really fascinating part of the Bhagavad Gita and teachings that are directly relevant to our everyday life. In the Western world, crisis is something that is stigmatized, so we don't like to talk about it. No one wants to be labeled as the person who's had a nervous breakdown at work. So when we inevitably encounter crisis, we tend to try to conceal it. We want to resist it, pretend it's not happening, conceal it, and do everything we can to avoid it. So ancient cultures, including ancient India, didn't see crisis in that way. They saw crisis as a sacred rite of passage. And they prepared you for this experience. So much so that it's accorded the name of a particular type of yoga, Vishad Yoga, the yoga of despair. So chapter 1 is about the yoga of despair, and it has many teachings contained in the verses of the first chapter and the beginning of the second chapter. So we'll have a look at that on June the 9th. But for today, there's one teaching relating to the dark night of the soul that is very important, and we'll begin with that. And that is accepting the circumstances that life puts us in. In a dark night of the soul, our small human story is ruptured, and we're struggling to find meaning and purpose in our life. And we experience acute fear, lamentation, and confusion. Just like Arjuna, he will mention the symptoms that he's experiencing. He'll express his fear, his lamentation, and his confusion. The four different symptoms of a dark night of the soul, you find them all in the verses of the first chapter of the Gita. So in that crisis situation, our natural tendency is we want things to be the way they were before. So we're clinging on to the fragments, the torn fabric of our story, and that simply intensifies the suffering associated with time that we're experiencing. The most powerful position is to come to a place of accepting the circumstances that have emerged in our field of action. That then allows us to respond rather than react. So rather than reacting from a place of fear or confusion or lamentation, we're able to not react but respond. And acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It doesn't mean that there may be appropriate action that we need to take, but it will be action from a place of samatva, a place of stability or sameness. And this, Krishna says, is yoga. Samatvam yoga uchyate. That stability or sameness amidst the chaos and the confusion of life is called yoga. So this reminds me of the experience of my younger brother, David, or Dasharat, who went through a very difficult few years of his life. He had severe pain around his waist and his hips. And he went to the doctor many times, and the doctor didn't know what to make of it, gave him painkillers, asked him, well, what do you think it is? And the pain was so severe at times that he couldn't sleep. And he would run a bath of freezing cold water and just lie in that, trying to remove some of that pain. So eventually, with great difficulty, he managed to convince an ambulance to come and pick him up. And after some tests, they found he had stage 4 cancer. It had metastasized all over his body, and he's fighting for his life. And this difficult situation continued for a number of years. There were operations that went very badly wrong, and he kind of was a hair's breadth. He was like just moments away from death. And I tried to be there for him, and to help him through his recovery. And there was one thing that he always said. He would say, "It is what it is." So when he would get like the latest news or blood test results, he would, and sometimes often they were not positive, and he would say, "It is what it is." And at the time, I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't say anything back. I thought, well, why? That seems like an obvious thing to say. Maybe it's a little bit overused as a phrase. But I remained silent. It's only later, actually, that I understood the wisdom of what he was not just saying, but doing. So when we say something, we're engaged in what's known as a speech act, what J.L. Austin refers to as a speech act. There's the meaning of the words that we say, and in uttering them, we're also doing something. So, for example, if a police officer sees some youngsters playing on a frozen lake, the police officer might call out to them and say, "The ice is thin over there." So what he's saying, or what she's saying, it has a meaning. The words have a meaning. The ice is thin over there, but the policeman's also doing something. In this case, he's issuing, or she's issuing, a warning. So everything that we say is, it has the component of the meaning of the words, but then also the intent and the purpose for actually uttering those words. So I realized in later years that what my younger brother was doing in saying "it is what it is he was reaching a place of acceptance. And that was the most powerful place he could be from which to then take steps forward and act. So again, acceptance is not resignation. In yoga asana, this acceptance of the circumstances that life brings us is embodied by the asana shavasana, the corpse pose. So for those of you listening, either live or the recording, I invite you, if you wish, in your own time, to try an exercise. It's a short meditation, just takes 5 or 10 minutes. And the best time to do it is in the morning, but also a good time is when you're troubled by something in particular. So this is a meditation about something that is really troubling you. It can be something that has happened. It can be the way a person is. That might be, that might be difficult for you. It can be something about oneself that we may find troubling about ourselves. So, in this meditation, find a place where you won't be disturbed, somewhere quiet. And I have found it helps to close one's eyes and think about that particular situation or that's something that is troubling you. And how does it make your body feel? Where, as you think about it, how become more aware of your feelings towards it and how those feelings are find their way into your body, into your posture, the way that you're breathing, the tension that's carried in different parts of your body. And then try changing your breathing. So instead of when we're preoccupied with something, when we're anxious or ill at ease, we tend to have shallow breaths from the chest. So now take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out and breathe from the stomach. As soon as we breathe from the stomach, we relax the whole body. And as you do that, and you can even adopt Shavasana pose, the corpse pose, if you know what that is. You can adopt the corpse pose for this particular meditation as well, and allow whatever that something is, just allow it to be. Accept it just as it is, without trying to undo it, resist it, change it. Now that might be difficult. We might think, no, we have to hold on to that resistance. If that happens, then think to yourself, just for this meditation, for these 5 to 10 minutes, I'll let this go. I can then pick it up again. I can pick up my bundle. I'll call it a bundle of concern. I can pick up that burden again after this meditation of just 5 or 10 minutes. And it's important to do this not intellectually, but from our heart. Truly feel it. Now I'm just allowing things to be. And then notice the changes in your body as you do that. The changes to your posture, the changes to your breathing, the vitality you experience. So this is an important teaching that will come across in the Bhagavad Gita. It relates also to the dark night of the soul. One of the key teachings of the dark night of the soul is to allow things to be. And rather than to try and resist such an experience, so resist, avoid, or there's so many ways that in the contemporary West we try to resist that kind of dark night of the soul or crisis. May turn to alcohol or drugs or meaningless sexual encounters, anything to numb the pain and to try and avoid facing such an experience. Now, I don't want to romanticize a dark night of the soul. It's a very difficult experience, but it's also something that inevitably comes to us. And there's very little in our upbringing or in our education to prepare us for it. But the Bhagavad Gita has a set of teachings embedded in these stunning Sanskrit verses that helps us navigate such an experience. So with that introduction to chapter 1, let's turn to the verses, specific verses that we'll be looking at today. So we'll start with verse 12 of chapter 1. So then Bhishma, the great valiant grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, the grandfather of the fighters, blew his conch shell very loudly, making a sound like the roar of a lion, giving Duryodhana joy. So you see here, Kuru Vridha. Vridha means elder, so the elder of the Kurus. Pitamaha, the grandfather. Pratapavan, the powerful, valiant one. So he roars like a lion. Simha nada. Nada means sound, and simha means lion. And he blows his war conch shell very loudly. And what does that do? Tasya sanjanayan harsham. Harsha means joy or delight or exhilaration. And tasya, of him, referring to Duryodhana, who's mentioned in the previous verse. So in other words, Bhishma roars like a lion, blows his war conch shell very loudly with the aim of delighting Duryodhana. So why is this important? Bhishma has a soft spot for Arjuna and his brothers, known as the Pandavas. And so by roaring like a lion, he's expressing his serious intent to fight. In other words, he's not going to hold back. So this is connected to the opening verse of the Bhagavad Gita. In the opening verse, if you remember, the blind king, emperor Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya, when my sons and the sons of Pandu, they went to Kurukshetra with the intent to fight, what happened? What did they do? So Sanjaya has been explaining what they did. And he's reached this point now where Bhishma roars like a lion, giving Duryodhana joy. And now Duryodhana's joy is reflected in Dhritarashtra. He too is feeling great joy at this moment as he's listening to the narration of events from Sanjaya. So a little bit about Bhishma. He had taken a vow of lifelong celibacy to please his father Santanu. We can't go into the story. I mean, it's an incredible, epic story, but we don't have the time, unfortunately. But his father was so surprised and so pleased with him that he gave him the power. He gave Bhishma the power that Bhishma could choose the timing of his own death. So Bhishma is practically invincible. At Kurukshetra, the same place that the armies are lined up on, Parashuram, an avatar or manifestation of Vishnu, had previously long ago earlier, had previously single-handedly annihilated a vast army of warrior kings. And Parashuram was the guru or teacher of Bhishma. He was the martial guru. In other words, he taught Bhishma everything Bhishma knows about being a warrior. And Bhishma and Parashuram had a falling out. Again, we can't look at the story, but it relates to three princesses, the daughters of the king of Kashi, who were kidnapped: Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. And Parashuram was insisting that Bhishma takes Amba's hand in marriage. But Bhishma refused because he had taken a vow of lifelong celibacy. And so Parashuram fought Bhishma for 27 days, also at Kurukshetra, the same place, but he was unable to defeat him. So just think how powerful a warrior Bhishma is. Parashuram single-handedly annihilated a colossal army of warrior kings, but he couldn't defeat Bhishma on that same battlefield. Now Bhishma is on this battlefield, and he's roaring like a lion, indicating his intent to not hold back. So naturally, Duryodhana is filled with joy. So the Kuru army, the Kaurava army, in other words, the army of Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, they have 11 huge divisions, military divisions. The Pandavas only have 7, so they're outnumbered. Therefore, if Bhishma will truly fight, the Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana will surely be undefeated. They'll be victorious. So they're thinking like that. And that's why Duryodhana and likewise Dhritarashtra are elated. So we turn now to the next verse, verse 13 of chapter 1. After that, the conch shells, drums, bugles, trumpets, and horns were all suddenly sounded, and the combined sound was tumultuous. So now all of the entire army of Duryodhana, hearing the roar of Bhishma, they all pick up their instruments and bugles and they make a huge sound, and that combined sound is tumultuous. Interesting how Sanskrit has very close connections to certain European languages. So the word tumultuous in Sanskrit is tumula. It comes from the English comes from the Latin tumultus. But you see the connection. There are some words that are very close between Sanskrit and some of the European languages. For those who are a language nerd, Lithuanian probably has the largest number of words that are practically equivalent to Sanskrit. It was so interesting. When I visited Lithuania, I was able to make out what people were saying by noticing some of the words that they were using, which were identical or nearly identical to Sanskrit words. It's one of the oldest languages in Europe. So this particular verse, what's the significance? Well, now all the warriors on the side of Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, they're sounding their instruments. And I mean, the Kaurava army, the Kurus, just their army alone would instill fear in any opponent. But here the Kauravas have also amassed armies of all the loyal kingships and their allies. And they have a huge army. The army is so large that you whichever direction you look at, you can't see the end. It's an army that appears to have no beginning and no end. And now, hearing the entire Kaurava army now making a tumultuous sound, Duryodhana becomes even more elated. He's certain of victory on the field of Kurukshetra. And likewise, Dhritarashtra, with whose words the Bhagavad Gita begins, he's also overjoyed. Now, there's an irony here, which I mentioned in the session on the first verse of the Gita, because the reader of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, which is 18 chapters in the Mahabharata, the reader knows more than Dhritarashtra at this point. At this point, Bhishma has already fallen, and he's lying on a bed of arrows. So the teaching, and Sanjaya has returned to Hastinapur to tell Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra says, Dharma kshetri, Kurukshetri. So, Samaveta Yuyutsava, my sons and the sons of Pandu, they were assembled on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. What happened? What did they do? And then Sanjaya begins to explain everything that we're all these verses that we're looking at. Sanjaya is speaking to the blind emperor, and he's getting to the point where Bhishma falls, which is on the 10th day of the battle. So the reader knows here that there's an irony to all of this, because the reader knows that Bhishma, the invincible Bhishma, has already fallen. So the teaching is that if we adopt the mindset of Dhritarashtra, as he expresses it in the opening verse of the Gita, defeat is already assured, even if we don't know it yet. So someone reached out after the session on the first verse of the Gita and asked a question about this. If Bhishma has already fallen, then why is he mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita? So we hear that Bhishma is roaring like a lion. So I thought I would just finish with this, because it's a good question, and it's important to understand this. The epics of India, like the Mahabharata and also the Puranas, they use a feature called emboxment, where one story is contained within another, or several stories are contained within other stories. Think of like a box with other boxes in them, and then smaller boxes within those. So you have different narrators explaining and explaining different parts of the events within larger narratives and so on. So you have Sanjaya. If you go to the Mahabharata, you have Sanjaya. He's present at Kurukshetra. He has divine vision, divya drishti, so he can see all parts of the battlefield, all corners. He can even look into the minds of the participants by the power of Vyasa. Vyasa has given him that ability. And so he's watching the battlefield, and on the 10th day of the battlefield, Bhishma falls. Again, we don't have time, but Bhishma falls because of Amba. Amba whose hand he had refused, she becomes Shikandi. And it's because of Shikandi that was the way that Bhishma was taken down. So all the various kind of details are very much connected, and it's just such a brilliant epic. So Bhishma has fallen, and then Sanjaya comes back to Hastinapur to quickly tell the king. This is the 10th day of the battle, so the battle is more than halfway, because the battle of Kurukshetra lasts for 18 days, and 10 have already passed, and Bhishma, the commander-in-chief, has fallen. And so Sanjaya, who is the minister of an advisor of Dhritarashtra, he's also sometimes Dhritarashtra's charioteer, much as Krishna is the charioteer of Arjuna. So Sanjaya returns to Hastinapur, and then he's relating the events, and he's saying, now Bhishma blew his conch, and then this happened and that happened, but these things have already passed. And then when he reaches the fall of Bhishma, then he continues explaining the events at Kurukshetra, but in real time. So this feature of emboxment is a fascinating. It allows stories to be emboxed in other stories in that way. So we'll stop here. In the next, as I mentioned, in a session in a few days' time on June the 9th, we'll continue with the dark night of the soul. We'll look especially at the 4 symptoms of a dark night, as well as 2 other teachings for best navigating a difficult experience like that. Ambika, I'm not able to hear you. I don't know if it's just me.
Nope. There it is. Thank you so much, Simon, for sharing your insights with us today. I think there's quite a bit there for us to take away, for us to walk away with the exercise that you shared, as well as that very personal story. So thank you so much. We will continue our study of the Bhagavad Gita this Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern. If you feel inspired, you can like this video and subscribe to get notifications of our upcoming classes. You can also connect with us on Instagram or leave us a comment with questions for our speakers, and we will get to them on our next class. So thank you again so much, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next time.